40th year of playing for silent films. What came first, your love of music or your passion for silent film?
Let's begin with films, not silent films. Interestingly, they both happened at the same time when I was 4 years old. And I come from a very musical family. My mother was a piano teacher, and she, after World War II, she was the traditional stay-at-home mom, but she taught piano lessons on the side, and she decided that when I was 4 to start giving me piano lessons. And but the same year, another event that really shaped my life is 1957 was the first year that the motion picture studios began syndicating motion pictures to television. Up until that point, television was the enemy, and they refused to do it. But then they realized there was money to be made. And my dad was jumping for joy, and he said, "Oh my gosh, they're going to run King Kong on TV." And my dad had seen it as a kid, and he said, "I can take you down to the Low Stage Theater and show you where my thumbprints are still embedded in the armrest." So I was 4, and I have an older brother, and they let us go to bed early, and they woke us up at 11:30 at night, and we sat and watched King Kong I remember it was in our basement on a TV screen about this big, and just that was it. I was hooked. And I became a horror movie buff, after that, and that's sort of how I started into it. But I also my interest in films, it's either genetic or environment, I'm not sure which. My dad was in the Signal Corps in World War II, and he was part of the Normandy invasion, and he followed the troops, and his job was repairing the shot-up radios and communications equipment. And so, he followed the troops all the way from Omaha Beach all the way to Berlin, repairing radio equipment. But he said it was actually very boring. He said, people think, you see the movies and you think, well, they march their way through. He said it was a year. And he said most of the time we spent sitting around, so we found a couple of old 16mm projectors, and the studios were releasing first-run films to the troops. So my dad became the projectionist for the entire battalion that marched its way all the way to Berlin. And so he was always a movie buff, so that's sort of where I pick it up. Silent films came a little later, though. I really didn't start getting into silence until late in high school because you couldn't see them. And that was with the Paul Killiam Silence Please series on public television, where for the first time I was seeing films like The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And really, honestly, until I got into college, I probably haven't seen more than a couple of silent films. So I started on piano, and my mother was very musical, and she said, "Oh, you've got to play a musical instrument." And then I played clarinet in a band for a while, and then bass clarinet. But then the other seminal event is the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan. And I said, "Oh, that is so cool," and I wanted to grow my hair long. But I took up guitar. And I was actually a very good guitarist. At my peak, I was probably a better guitarist than I am today on piano. And for you aging rockers, if you remember, there was a band called The Outsiders. It was a one-hit wonder band who did Time Won't Let Me. And their lead guitarist was Walt Nims, and Walt went on to write Precious and Few, which went platinum in the late 70s. Walt was my guitar teacher, and which shows that even when you're the lead guitarist of a top rock band, you still have to make a living by giving lessons. So Walt was my guitar teacher. So I played guitar in a loud rock band, permanently damaged my hearing doing that. I stood in front of a wall of speakers, and to this day, I mean, when I can hear well, I can do fine. But when I'm in a noisy room, or like if water is running and someone's talking, I can't quite make out what they're saying. And so the moral of the story is you don't stand in front of a big wall of speakers. And in fact, because of that, I've gotten very good. I read lips pretty well, so it's fun when you watch silent movies because then you see all the dirty words that they're speaking that are on the internet.
Yeah, sometimes they're not exactly speaking the line.
And my personal favorite being in the crowd where she turns to him and says, "I'm pregnant." And you figure out what she is, but that was considered a bad word. You never said that in movies. So I was very musical, but it was actually around my senior year in high school where I just started picking up piano again. And in college, I just started playing piano, and actually the girls' dorms had better pianos, so I would always go over to the girls' dorms and play because I thought this would be a good way to meet girls. Never worked. But I started playing, and I played by ear very well. I mean, I've always been able to just hear a melody, I can just play it. When I became interested in film, I went to my first Cinecon. Some of you have heard about Cinecon. It's a big film festival. They just had their 51st year. It's been running in Los Angeles since 1990, but prior to 1990, it actually moved around the country. In fact, Rob McKay and I hosted it in San Francisco in 1984. And I went to my first Cinecon in New Haven, Connecticut in 1974. And I went with some friends. I'd just kind of gotten into the film collector groups. And they said, well, let's go to this thing called Cinecon. And they asked me because I had a car that I could drive, and they didn't. So 5 of us drove in a Plymouth Valiant from Cleveland, Ohio to New Haven. And I went in, I don't know if it's the first film I saw, but one of the first films I saw was Fritz Lang's Woman in the Moon, which I'd always wanted to see because I'd read about. And Stu Oderman was was an accompanist, and he played for it. I cannot describe the sensation that was for me. I mean, it was an out-of-body experience. I was so completely mesmerized that he just played this film from, it's 100 plus minutes at the American cut. The long one is 3 hours, but it was 105 minutes, and he just played it from beginning to end, and it sucked you in. And I don't remember who was sitting next to me at the time. It might have been a total stranger, but when it was over, I turned to them and I said, I don't know how he did that. I'm going to learn to do that.